Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, viewers all over the world. I'm Gwen Robinson, former president of the Foreign Correspondents Club, and we're here tonight to talk about Myanmar, the People's War versus the Tatmadaw resolution or prolonged stalemate. We have an excellent lineup of speakers. I have one with me in the clubhouse, Tony Davis to my right. I'll introduce the others shortly. I'd just like to make the point that the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand is back after a prolonged lockdown and then semi-lockdown, and running programs regularly. And next week we'll have a couple more, including an evening looking at the emergence of Thailand's creative soft power on the evening of October the 27th with some of the leading Thai filmmakers, writers, visual artists and curators. On October 29, on Friday here, we will look at the Making of the Serpent, the Netflix series about Charles Sabraj, the serial killer, and the era in Bangkok, where he was operating with some very interesting people, including one who interviewed him extensively. So watch out for that, and watch our Facebook and website, please, for updates. And also, please note, and you'll see if you're watching on the stream, the club is really trying to climb out of a very difficult period after extended lockdowns, and we welcome any donations and support. Also, in keeping with the Myanmar theme tonight, the club is running a Myanmar Media Support Fund and taking donations of used equipment, computer and other electronic equipment that is going to help Myanmar exiled journalists, many of who were driven out of their offices or homes or country with little equipment and little support. So you can donate to the Myanmar Media Fund under the Foreign Correspondents Club, details on Facebook, or donate equipment and send any queries to the club. So thank you for listening to that, and let me turn to the event tonight. Just a short preamble, which I think most of you, if you're watching, are well aware. Since the February 1st coup in Myanmar, analysts have evoked a prolonged civil war scenario, citing the example of Syria, with many warnings of a complete breakdown in security, economic collapse amid severe human rights abuses by security forces. Added to that, we have recent reports that the military, or Tatmadaw, is gearing up now for a sweeping assault on key areas of resistance in Myanmar, which some of our panellists, including Tony to my right, will be filling us in on. Overall, I'd say the situation was most eloquently put recently in a new report by International Crisis Group issued this week, which summed it up thus: Myanmar's military regime has brutally repressed the population as it tries to quash dissent and consolidate its grip on the country. A broad-based resistance movement is using non-violent and violent means to prevent the junta from succeeding, with no sign that the deadlock will end soon. Vulnerable populations face a dire future and most likely a prolonged and deadly stalemate. In addition to the insecurity, Myanmar's economy is in free fall. The national currency is crashing. Don't be fooled by the relative stabilisation of the last recent days. That was my comment. Health and education systems have collapsed. Poverty rates are estimated to have doubled since 2019, and half of all households cannot afford enough food. That's half of all households in Myanmar, a country of 53 to 54 million people. Despite the severe situation and the considerable risks associated with having a failed state at the heart of the Indo-Pacific, international attention is waning, and sadly so is media attention, with so many issues vying for the headlines. So against that very grim backdrop, tensions and violence have ratcheted up significantly, as I think you all know, with the September 7 declaration by the National Unity Government of a people's defensive war. Since then, even amidst the confusion over numbers and facts, there's been clearly a pronounced surge in attacks across the country on Tatmadaw forces and other apparatus attached to the junta, known as the State Administration Council. Self-defence groups and key ethnic armed organisations have mounted attacks of various sorts throughout much of the country, in villages, countryside as well as cities. It's also clear in recent months that their tactics are becoming more sophisticated, as we'll hear from our experts tonight. There are also increasingly mixed signals from external players, such as China and now ASEAN, which did actually, after months of prevarication, make a historic decision, as most of you probably know, to bar Myanmar's self-declared leader, Min Aung Hlaing, from its summit in late October. As noted, the Tatmadaw, which led the coup, has launched savage campaigns against dissent throughout the country. Some analysts have evoked its notorious four cuts strategy used against insurgents in earlier times, and also the brutal tactics used in its 2016-17 expulsion of Rohingya Muslims from Rakhine State. Since the coup, nearly 9,000 civilians have been arrested. Many were released recently, but I think there are people here tonight that will fill you in on what that really means, which is possibly not much. And at least 1,181 have been killed by the junta's security forces, according to monitoring by the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. The NUG's declaration of war came amid an escalation in bombings, targeted killings, sabotage and armed clashes carried out mainly by civilian groups. Ethnic armed organisations, meanwhile, have also intensified campaigns against military forces, with groups in some areas assisting the PDFs, the People's Defence Forces, with training and logistics. And some former Tatmadaw members, as you'll hear tonight, have established organisations such as People's Soldiers, who are present on our panel, and are appealing to former colleagues to defect and join the people. Initially peaceful, the broad anti-coup movement has morphed in step with the proliferation of PDFs, now estimated to number more than 300 groups, with a core of at least 50 groups around the country equipped with firearms and explosives. You'll hear more about that. In the cities, some groups are using urban guerrilla tactics, bombings, assassinations and attacks on infrastructure. And the NUG claims that at least 1,700 or more security forces have been killed so far, particularly since the September 7 declaration, while scores of civilian administrators and people linked to the junta have been assassinated. The regime, meanwhile, claims that as of September 9, the resistance had killed 799 civilians linked to the administration and injured another 726 in assassination attempts. These numbers are broadly drawn out by independent media reports. So where is all this leading, and is there any hope of a resolution? Well, it's clear that the junta, led by Min Aung Hlaing, has been unable to assert control over the country. Most analysts are envisaging a prolonged stalemate amidst intensifying repression. Efforts by countries, including China, Japan, members of ASEAN, the United Nations, to mediate the crisis have so far proven pretty fruitless. And we can now see, even in ASEAN, they are creating rifts within the bloc. So, turning to our panel tonight, on the screen, we have, in semi-darkness, on the bottom right, is Captain Nyi Tuta, founding member of People's Soldiers, made up of former Tatmadaw members who have defected from the military and are urging colleagues to join the people. As I said, right next to me is Anthony Davis, security consultant and analyst with Janes. On the upper right hand on the screen is Daw Tin Tin Nyo, managing director of Burma News International, an alliance of independent ethnic and local media, which comprises a lot of journalists in very difficult areas of the country inside Myanmar, many of them in hiding, but so many of them still bravely reporting on the situation on the ground in these ethnic areas. And then on the bottom left, against the NLD flag, I think, is Nang Tu Ong, Permanent Secretary of the National Unity Government's Ministry of Defence. And then, last but not least, on the far left upper, is Jason Tao, Myanmar Country Director the United States Institute for Peace. We are hoping we may be joined by someone else who is inside Myanmar, but at the moment that is looking a bit shaky due to internet connections. So I'd like to start with Captain Nyi Tuta, who will outline the whole rationale behind the People's Soldiers and how their campaign is going to persuade military members to defect. So over to you, Captain Nyi Tuta. Oh, by the way, before he starts, you're welcome to ask questions. We're taking questions over Facebook and from the floor. So just either post them on Facebook or wait until we've finished this section. So, Captain Nyi Tuta.
Yes.
Go ahead. Tell us about People's Soldiers.
Our People's Soldiers is an organization which is founded by the federal soldiers.
Right. Yes, and would you like to tell us how it's, how you formed it and how it's going and what you think about the numbers that have joined and where you're going, what your strategy and aim is?
Please, Ben. Okay, let me answer in Burmese.
Sure. Sorry, I think we've got...
Okay, yeah. ပြည်သူစစ်သားရဲ့ view နီး view ဟာလေးကျဉ်းချုပ်ပြောပြပြီးတော့ရမလားခင်ဗျာတဲ့
ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့ဒီမဟာ view ဟာအဓိကတော့ဒီပြည်သူစစ်သားတွေနဲ့
interpreter, sorry. Go on.
ပြည်သူစစ်သားတွေနဲ့ပြည်သူတွေနဲ့ပူးပေါင်းပြီးတော့မှဒီစစ်အာဏာရှင်တွေပြိုလဲအောင်တိုက်ထုတ်ဖို့ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်
Interpreter?
The defection strategy ultimate aim is to unite the national soldiers of Myanmar with the national citizens of Myanmar.
Could you speak up, please, interpreter? And I can see we've just been joined by our guest, so maybe...
Yes.
Would you like to continue,
May I speak?
Captain Nyi Tuta, or could we just switch for a minute to our guest from central Myanmar and come back to you? Would you mind? Hello? So, is that Mang Tiha Tun? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, if I could introduce, we didn't want to list this on our program due to security concerns, but Mang Tiha Tun is a member of a People's Defence Force in central Myanmar, and I think is taking a lot of risk to hook up with us tonight. And maybe you could tell us your situation and what it's like on the ground in where you are, which I think is sort of quite a mountainous area.
Yes. So I'm currently working with one of the resistance groups that are fighting against the Myanmar Lines Tatmadaw. We were under heavy assault in the previous months. Then the villagers had to go hiding in their farms and in the forest. So not only were we fighting the SAC soldiers, but also we were protecting and arranging the supplies and other medical care for the public and as well as our resistance soldiers. So, but for the meantime, it's a little bit quiet here. But we are also reorganizing and re-strategizing. So from being a defensive guerrilla tactics to we are thinking more of offensive guerrilla tactics. So, but as of now, we are still strategizing. And I'm also very honored and happy to be a part of these panel discussions. And I hope to learn more from all of the members and guests. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We are very honoured and happy to have you. Maybe you could just tell us also whether you feel one of the trends recently has been some linkages between PDF groups, even also with some ethnic armed groups. So do you feel you are fighting in isolation, or are you seeing more linkages? And I think also you are setting up sort of local structures that are kind of almost like administrative committee for local communities. Hi, Mang Thi Hatun, are you there? I think we've lost him. Oh, he's got a microphone? What? What is it? Mang Thi Hatun, are you there? Okay, he'll come back in. So let's just turn back to Captain Nituta if you're there. And yes,
I'm here.
Yes. So do you want to speak yourself or speak through your interpreter?
Oh, yes. I will speak in English for my speech.
Yes, so please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start my opening remarks by thanking Queen for giving me our opportunity to speak here. It's an honor to share the budget stage with these distinguished guests. I believe we are all here because we are united in our struggle to end the illegitimate and traitorous hunter. My name is Captain Nituta. I'm a founding member of People Soldiers. We are an organization founded by defected soldiers, which advocates for defection from the Myanmar junta. Further, we provide support for defection soldiers and their families. I myself am defected soldiers. I joined the people on February 28, but in my heart, I had already joined the people since February 1, the day of the coup. And after seeing the brutality committed upon innocent peaceful protesters, I defected. I could no longer be in an institution that had broken its oath to protect the people. I could no longer be under the command of generals that committed treason upon the nation and its people. That is why we, soldiers of the people, declared that Senior General Min Aung Hlaing and senior military officers are removed from office for violently overthrowing the democratically elected government. We declare that our soldiers of the Tamil don't need to follow this order of these traitorous generals. Let me be clear, the generals are the rebels. They are not the true military. They violated their oath, and we have joined the people because we have kept our oath as professional soldiers. I believe with full confidence that the majority of the soldiers inside the Tamil are on the side of the people. I would say that 90% of the soldiers inside do not support the military council. Knowing this, I pioneered the defection strategy. The defection strategy is a non-violent resistant method that aims to unite soldiers with citizens. But initially, the public and the NUG found it difficult to accept the strategy. After much effort by us, I'm glad to say we have changed opinions. Defection will trigger the fault line in the Tamil and lead it if collapsed. Only then can the revolution be won with the least bloodshed. The generous worst nightmare is our great dream to see the people and soldiers be united. After all, armed soldiers themselves citizens as well. United we stand, and divided we fall. And in order to ensure we are united, people soldiers have a multi-pronged advocacy effort that include public discussion, social media campaigns, information welfare, and knowledge sharing. Our public discussion brings together the federal soldiers and members of the public and asking guests to foster mutual understanding. We convert the lies and misinformation that journalists have been broadcasting inside the barrack. Just this Sunday, we had a discussion with Dr. Sasa, Ministry for International Cooperation. Kuti Zasan, a prominent protest leader, as you know, one of the 100 most influential people by Times. In past discussion, the NUG Minister for Human Rights, U Myume, and the Ministry of Electricity and Energy, Usuturaton, have participated. Our discussions are meant to make the public more understanding of the plight of the soldiers who themselves are prisoners of the military. We want the public to welcome the soldiers. Our discussions are also meant to bring people, to bring hope to those inside. We also break down the lies and fear that our military has put it inside the barrack to stop soldiers from defecting. I remember this quote from the movie, which I saw many years ago. Fears can hold you a prisoner. Hope can set you free. People soldiers offer hope. For the soldiers that have defected, we offer food, shelter, healthcare, confidential counseling, and vocational training for them and their family members. These national soldiers are heroes that have given so much to be on the side of justice. The least we can do is to take care of them and their families. I will not lie, the work ahead of us is huge. We must ramage all our efforts. We must increase our advocacy efforts. We must invest more resources into helping these defenders. We must provide more to defend soldiers as well. In the past several months, I read many international news articles running of that Myanmar is at the brink of civil war. Actually, war is already upon us. But don't forget that military wage war on its own people. We are fighting back because it is our last resort. We are fighting because we have the right of the self-defense. Let me be clear, this is the defensive revolution war. We have two paths ahead of us, a war with bloodshed and a war with the least possible bloodshed. Or if I have to use the title of this talk, it is either a resolution of the prolonged statement. I'm here to tell you how we can get on the path of resolution, on the path of the least bloodshed, and this is the defection strategy. So I would like to request this from all of you, esteemed correspondents, please raise awareness about the defection strategy. Please support our work. If you want to support, please visit our website, peoplesoldier.org. Thank you for this opportunity to speak all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Captain Yututa, and of course we'll be coming back to you. Next, actually, we're going to turn to you, Tintin Yo, and perhaps you can give us an idea of how the People's War has played out in the ethnic areas, what you're hearing from your members, etc.
Thank you so much, Gwen. And also, I would like to thank FCCT for organizing this event. FCCT has been standing with the pro-democracy group of Burma for a long time. So I used to be at that place and then talk about different human rights violation issues as in the past as well. So we really appreciate for standing with us in our fight for democracy and to end the militarization in the country. And I'm very honored to be together with like Captain Yituda and also other fantastic speaker colleagues, and I hope to learn a lot too. And I'm honored to also speak about what is happening in our ethnic area and also how our local independent media groups are surviving under this current crisis. For me, it's like before that, I just would like to say that, during the 10 years of the so-called democratization process, the media also take the role to help widen up the democratization process in the country with a high hope to actually have a good role and then some kind of freedom for media to play its role in the country. However, even before the coup, the media role has never been that free. But after the coup, everything go really bad. So all the freedom of expression, freedom to write, and access to information has been restricted. And then every movement has been monitored and also like a check. And then, people's lives are really under the surveillance of the military council. So whenever the fighting happened, of course, the whole country is facing different kinds of threats, challenges, and life risky situation. But every war situation can happen in the different ethnic areas and also remote area, and where the limited information can be accessed, and also internet are often cut off. You may also notice that like a few weeks back, there were 25 townships, there was like internet access has been cut out. So that include the most active fighting areas like Chin State, Sakai region, and also Gaya State. So those are the place where the most active fighting are happening, and then the biggest requirements are also there. Of course, everyone is facing with different kinds of crises and different kinds of threat, and then also, pressure, and people are living with both mental and physical threat, and there are lots of trauma that people are living no matter where they stay, behind the bar or outside. So that would also go to the media houses as well. So since the beginning of the coup, they have targeted to the media houses, and then a few media houses their license to publish are completely revoked, and then there are like a constant arrest to the media personnel and searching and also raiding the media houses. So people have to go for hiding and reporting. So what we are so proud of is like the people who are working in the different media houses, no matter how hard it is, they play their role so well for continued reporting. And then they themselves are in the IDP camps. They themselves are staying in some kind of borders area where there is no future, but they're still keeping their work. So that is what our members, BNI members, the 16th of the independent media outlets are doing. So they keep reporting what is happening on the ground. And to get the information and the sources are getting more and more difficult. There are lack of trust. And trust is from both sides, the sources and also the media person themselves. Because like when they introduce themselves, okay, I belong to this and that media organization, they don't know whether those persons that they interview are going to report them to the authority nearby. So that also quite like, risky. And also the sources themselves also do not want to provide information anymore. Even when they give the information, they said that, okay, don't use my name, or maybe don't say that I'm saying it, something like that, So people are really in fear but somehow there are many brave people still. Because of that, also we are able to continue producing news, not only like writing, text news, but also video, audio, and we are trying to expand more multimedia, because like we can know that people hardly access to TV, and also in some area very unlikely to access to internet and all the times. So that's why we are also expanding to some kind of podcasting in this time, so that people can listen to when they have times or when they can access to internet. So that those are the situations that we are facing, and then it is in high risk, and then the emergency needs of the activists and also the media, personal media houses are, is a chronic. I mean, like they will continue to need this kind of support for all the times, so that they can continue reporting on the ground. You may also notice that like more than 100 media personnel were arrested. Of course, like many have been released. And just a few days ago, about 17 media personnel has been released, and many of them are our dear friends and colleagues. And we were so happy for their release, but we always say that they should have never been arrested on the first hand, because they didn't commit any crimes. What they did is they just report what is happening on the ground, and then the crimes committed by the military council, all the human rights violations committed by the military council, and exposes. So that is the work that the media people have to do, because that is their work. Because of that, they are arrested. So anyway, we are happy with those friends who are released, but we are still very concerned for those who are still behind bar. There are still 35 media persons are still behind bar, but of course there are many thousand more who are still behind bars, and we really want them to be released. And then that's why, like for us, is as long as if that military council or the militarization exists in our soil or in our country, no one can live in peace, and we can never hope for a peaceful life. That's why we must eradicate, remove completely the militarization in our country. So we support any defensive war, any defensive fighting against the military council and the military forces. So like the media is, the media groups like us will play a key role to continue providing accurate, reliable information to the general public, so that they can make the best and wise decision when fighting against the military council and the military junta. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Tintin. I think you hit the nail on the head about information, though, which is in short supply. We're going to turn to Tony Davis now, but I see we've got Mang Thi Hatun back. Look, Mang Thi Hatun, we lost you before, but I had asked you, you were just talking about joining the PDF there, and I asked you about whether the one perception has been that in recent weeks, particularly PDFs like yours have made more connections with ethnic armed groups and with each other. Do you feel you're fighting in isolation, or in your area are you seeing more cooperation or linkages with other PDFs or with ethnic armed groups?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, we all took arms just because we were angry. We didn't think through. We were just maybe hot-blooded. So we started to take arms and fight back. We had some initial success, but later on, we knew it was going to be long, and we need to be more organized. So we had to organize our ragtag army into a more manageable, a more serious, a more organized troops. But initially, all of us in different regions, also in the central regions, also in the states, people were fighting, taking arms, but they were more of like township level groups and resistance. But as the fighting goes on and on and on, we were more connected. We have more linkages. We have more connections with the EAOs. But on the other hand, I think in terms of strategy and coordinated attack, we are not to that level yet. Of course, this is the first time for almost all the PDFs. It is first time for us. So there are many things that we are learning, we are still learning, and we still need to learn. But we are more connected, we have more linkages than before. But I think our next step will be a more solid plan or strategy when it comes to coordinated attack, a more like a better execution of in and out of the enemy's area or whatever their convoys. We have a better coordinated attack. So that would be our next level and the next stage that we are trying to go. And of course, the weapons being our biggest challenges, but still, and we are connected with the EEOs, big EEOs. And then we are also thinking of ways, creating chances that we might fight better. We have better results. So of course, we're still learning, and we have come a long way, I would say.
Right, and you, like some of your colleagues, were not fighters before, so you've never done this before, as you said. How are you learning through trial and error, or are you getting training? Do you think to go to the next level, are you just sort of working it out on your own?
We sent some people to big EOs like KIA, KNU. I think that's what most PDFs do, I think. Right. So we have some of the trainers, they were back. But for our PDF, we trained earlier than other PDFs because we saw when shootings broke out in Yangon and Mandalay, we realized that we need to take arms. Nothing's happened yet in our area, in our town, but judging from the scenes in Yangon and Mandalay, we knew that we need to take arms. We have to be prepared. So we sent our people, the young guys, for training to KIA, KNU. Then we were already in training by the end of February. By the end of March, we're already in training. Right. So, but of course, it's that 2 weeks training, so we still need to, that training doesn't mean much. Even though it's only straight, that short training survives all.
Right. I think we're losing you again. Okay, so we'll just, we'll bring him back in a bit later and maybe turn to, I mean, this is the perfect segue really, Tony, into, you have covered it, I think, more extensively than almost anyone I know, the evolution of what Mang Thi Hatun is talking about, the, the emergence of PDFs, the development of what we're seeing now. So over to you. There's a lot you can talk about.
Gwen, thank you. Is this on or not?
Yeah, I think you could speak up a bit.
Is it on? Yep,
yes.
It's on. Okay. It's a perfect segue in one sense, but in another sense, I would like to make the comment that I feel somewhat uncomfortable sitting in a comfortable room in Bangkok, pontificating about conflict in another country, which I haven't actually spent time covering on the ground, and that's not my style, either as a journalist or an analyst. I like to know the people and the environment in which conflict is taking place. So that's a big disadvantage this evening. Nevertheless, I have been doing my best to follow what has been happening in Myanmar day by day, and I'm going to make a few very broad comments which hopefully will shed some light on the situation. I think the first thing, which Gwen has already referred to, is the extent to which this conflict, and the PDFs in particular, are a remarkable nationwide phenomenon. I was looking at one statistic generated by a colleague of Gwen and mine's, Matthew Arnold, who has also done a lot of work on this subject, who has arrived at the figure that 250 of Myanmar's 330 townships have seen some level of PDF or EAO conflict since the coup. So that's a pretty remarkable statistic. In terms of PDFs themselves, we're also looking at a very, I would say, unprecedented proliferation of groups, such that at least 300 different groups have identified themselves on social media and announced their intention to conduct armed struggle against the military junta. 300 is a large number. My own sense is that in terms of groups which are conducting sustained, regular military operations, you could probably pull that down to about 50. Some of them have joined other ones, others have dropped out, some have been eliminated by the military. So if you think in terms of 50 different PDFs countrywide, that probably gives you a good sense of where it's at. One of the real problems, which we've already heard spoken about this evening, is the difficulty of tracking what's going on. It's a big country, there's a lot of different groups, there's activity happening every day, and looking at this from the outside, it makes any monitoring, you can monitor, but it makes analysis very difficult because of the geographical spread, because of the number of different groups doing different things, but also because of a real and really understandable tendency to inflate and exaggerate. And by that, I guess what I'm referring to is if you're in a PDF and you're risking your life to conduct military operations and there's a firefight, you're going to hope that 10 or even 20 of your enemy suffer casualties, die, or are wounded. And that's what you're going to report back to the boss, and the boss is maybe in contact with the NUG, the National Unity Government, or he may be in contact with local journalists or national journalists in Myanmar, and he's going to report these figures, which in some cases, when you look at them, we are seeing statistics of ambushes of Tatmadaw convoys in which 20 soldiers die. Now, I've seen ambushes of convoys in Afghanistan, and to kill 20 soldiers, that's a pretty remarkable event, particularly if you're not that well armed. So this is a problem, and it complicates our understanding of the level of the conflict and where it's going. Okay, very broadly, I'm going to divide PDFs into two categories. One is urban, one is rural. Gwen's already mentioned those, and they're obviously very different because the environments are so different. If we look at urban PDFs, we're talking very largely Yangon, which is a huge city of 7 million, and Mandalay, and one or two other larger cities rather than towns. And essentially, in recent months, what we've seen is two different tactics used again and again and again. One is targeted killings by individual or a small group of gunmen, killing or wounding local administrators, suspected informants of the military, people who, in their assessment, sustain military rule at particularly the local level. To date, no really high-level assassinations, but in terms of local stuff, it's happening every day. That's one tactic. The other tactic is the use of improvised explosive devices, which again are happening every day, particularly in Yangon. There really doesn't go a day past in Yangon without 3 or 4 or more IED incidents. Some of them mostly against soft targets, so primarily against the same sort of targets that targeted killings are focused on, local government, but also army banks, army factories, soft targets associated with the military. And by definition, as these activities are happening in urban areas, they're conducted by small cells. And I don't know, and maybe some of our Myanmar colleagues here can give us more information. I don't know roughly what the number of men and women in a cell might be. It could be as small as 5, it could be as big as 20. My own assessment is once you get bigger than 20, the operational security risks become exponentially higher. So somewhere in that region. Rural PDFs are a very different animal. By definition, you're operating probably in a small township or in villages around a small township, and that allows for larger groups to form. So you see bigger groups conducting both of the 2 tactics that I've already referred to in the urban setting, but also, and most importantly, IED attacks targeted on security force convoys, and these are happening every day. There's a lot of talk about landmines, quote unquote. My own belief is that, and from what is available on video, is that these are actually roadside IEDs of the sort, to a degree that we are probably familiar with from the southern Thailand experience. So a lot of those ambushes or use of IEDs against movement of security forces are happening on a daily basis. The nature of the rural conflict and the ability of PDFs to congregate in larger numbers has, to a degree, encouraged and permitted a militarization of their organization. So they're in numbers which in some case amount to what in an army would be company strength, 100 men, maybe more in some cases, and they can conduct attacks on that basis. So it's a very different environment. One point that is worth making, I think, is that since the declaration of war by a declaration of People's Defensive War by the NUG on the 7th of September, there has been a shift in tactics towards infrastructure, which was not that common before. So the most publicized element of that has been attacks on mobile phone towers owned by the Mytel company, which is partly owned by the Tatmadaw and also by the Ministry of Defense in Vietnam. So they have been, those mobile phone towers have been a major target of attacks across the country, including in towns and on the edge of Rangoon. The other infrastructure thing, which is arguably more consequential, is attacks on bridges and railways. And in September, there have been, I'm not going to list them, it would be tedious, but there have been quite a few, I won't say numerous, but quite a few, as in 5, 6, 10 attacks on railway bridges, trains, railway tracks, which obviously has the potential to complicate life for the regime in a serious way, given the role of railways in Myanmar. Another point which I think is important to understand, which has been touched on by Gwen and some of the other speakers, particularly the gentleman from actually inside Myanmar, is the way in which the militarization of PDFs in some cases has been driven and facilitated by their proximity to ethnic armed organizations, EAOs. So what you've seen in Kaya, in Chin, Kaya in the east on the Thai border, Chin State on the Indian border in the west, and also in northeastern Sagaing, close to the Kachin area and KIA, what you've seen there is an interaction with groups who have been armed and on and off fighting the Tatmadaw for many, many years. So they have not only the capacity to train, they have their own experience, and they are in a position to, in some cases, particularly in Kaya and in northeastern Sagaing, to operate with, alongside, shoulder to shoulder with PDFs. And that accelerates the militarization of a PDF, which otherwise would face real problems of lack of experience and, to a degree, lack of weapons. Okay, I'm going to make two sort of concluding remarks, extended remarks, about the context in which all this is developed and where it might be going. And I think it's important to appreciate that in terms of the context in which this has happened since March, essentially. The coup was in February, you had a period of peaceful protest, and then by March the regime was shooting people in the head, and then a lot worse. So between March and today, what we've seen are circumstances which have very largely been favorable to the resistance, to PDFs, on three counts. One is, for obvious reasons, these PDFs have emerged on a wave of popular anger, real visceral anger, and a determination that enough is enough. This country has been ruled by incompetent and brutal generals for much too long. So that wave of anger and revolutionary enthusiasm, the word revolution is used a lot, and it means something in this context. And that sort of enthusiasm translates very obviously into large recruitment. Not difficult to find young men and women who are ready to fight. The second element, which has been favorable to the PDF, is that the security forces have been caught entirely off guard. They never saw this coming, and they've been struggling for months to adapt to dealing with it, because a lot of the violence, a lot of the attacks that have been unfolding have been in places such as Yangon or Magwe in the west or Sagaing further north, which have never seen conflict in decades, if at all. So the security forces have had a real problem adapting to this surge of popular resistance. And specifically, the key area where they've had problems dealing with it is at the very basic level of intelligence. If you want to fight somebody, you've got to know who you're fighting, where they are, and how they operate. Well, that's really difficult if, on the one hand, the people you're fighting are still themselves trying to figure out where it's going to go. You're not dealing with an enemy army, you're dealing with a very fluid structures which are developing as the situation moves forward. So that's one problem. And the other problem is that you yourself are being blinded by PDF elements who are specifically targeting your eyes and ears. So you hire somebody to inform where's this cell operating, who's moving weapons, who's doing what. That individual is now very, very likely to be killed, whether it's in a rural setting, in a village, or whether it's in an urban setting. So intelligence is a huge problem for the military. And the third element, which has been favorable to the PDFs over this six or 7 months since it all began, is the fact that this has coincided exactly with the rainy season. So during the rainy season, PDFs have had the luxury of being able to send, as we've heard from practitioners in real people in the field, they can send their people to EAO areas to undergo training sessions of whatever it may be, 2 weeks or hopefully longer. So the rainy season has been useful at that level. It's also been useful to the degree that the security forces have been unable, because of the rains and because of the terrain, they've been unable to conduct large operations themselves. So they've been trying to adapt, trying to figure out what's going on, and at the same time unable to react in the sort of aggressive, brutal style, which is what they do. So where's it going? Clearly, what is happening right now is that the Tatmadaw is preparing to hit back. They have been watching this for too long, and the dry season is coming up, and traditionally that is their opportunity to move large bodies of men and conduct widespread operations. Up until now, the reaction has mainly been at township level, where you have had relatively small groups, a company, a police or a company of Tatmadaw soldiers going to a suspect village, burning a couple of houses, rounding up the usual suspects, shooting a few, and going home the same evening, which is not an effective method of counterinsurgency. It's arguably counterproductive. So that's what's been happening now, but that's not going to last much longer. And the reality, which is painful to articulate, but is nonetheless true, is this Tatmadaw reaction in the dry season is going to fall on groups whose military capabilities reflect geographical breadth right across the country rather than organizational depth. Some of them are well organized, a lot are not, because they're learning from scratch. They weren't doing this 7 or 8 months ago. Now they are. So they have limited experience, limited training, even granted the numbers that have gone through EAO training camps, and most importantly, very limited weaponry. And this is a huge problem, because when you want to fight back, when you want to fight a guerrilla conflict, when you want to conduct ambushes on convoys that really hurt, you need weapons like machine guns, mortars, and importantly, rocket-propelled grenades. I once asked an Afghan commander at the end of the Afghan war, what won the war for you guys? And I was expecting the standard answer would be, oh, Stinger missiles from Uncle Sam. No, the answer he gave me was the rocket-propelled grenade, RPG, because they can hit convoys again and again and again. And they're easy to move, easy to carry. And the number of these sort of weapons now in PDF hands is unfortunately very small. There are some. A lot of PDFs have access to automatic rifles, which is a lot better than a hunting rifle, but in terms of support weaponry at section level, groups of 10 guys, you need things like RPGs and machine guns. They don't have them. So over the coming months, I think PDFs are going to need to focus as much on surviving as on carrying the war to the enemy. The enemy is going to be coming to them. There's no question about that. They're not going to have to find the Tatmadaw. The Tatmadaw will be coming their way. And basically, what that survival over the coming dry season and beyond requires is, one, savvy tactics. That means knowing the 101s of guerrilla warfare. If the enemy advances, you retreat. If the enemy sets up a camp, you harass it. If the enemy retreats, you pursue. This is Mao Zedong 101. And it's basic stuff, but if you haven't done it before, that learning curve can be extremely costly and painful, and that's not good for morale. So tactics is one thing, and I think the other thing is getting access to better weaponry, and this is going to be crucially important, both in the coming months and beyond. And there's only two ways that could be done, really, realistically. One is by capturing weapons from your enemy. So if you are ambushing a convoy, your primary tactical objective should be, it doesn't matter whether you kill the guy or wound him, you want his weapon. That's number one. So capturing weapons from the enemy, overrunning small outposts, police, hitting him where he's weak, getting weapons, key thing. And the other thing is acquiring or buying, whatever it takes, more weapons from groups that have them, and that's EAOs, particularly the Kachin, who have been to a degree generous already, and I think Jason will talk much more about this, but what they have bought, what PDFs have been able to buy to date has been woefully inadequate when you look at what's going to be coming their way in the coming months. So they are looking over the coming dry season at a dire situation. But at the end of the day, the degree of revolutionary fervor and hope and anger across Myanmar, I believe, is enough eventually to see them through. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Tony. Before we'll move on into Nang Tuong, but just one more thing, which is your latest piece just published this week, but really the focus was very much on this massive looming nationwide operation that you're saying the Tatmadaw is, gearing up to launch. On the other hand, you're also good at talking about how overstretched the Tatmadaw is and how low level the numbers actually are. Even though they look good on paper, they might have all these light infantry divisions, but your point is that they are deeply understaffed. I think Nyi Tuta's point is that there's demoralization. And on the other hand, you've said that this is going to be like the Myanmar version of shock and awe, this new operation. So what do you think is the upshot, given what you've just said?
Let me correct you, if I may, on 2 points. One, I didn't say that this was going to be a nationwide operation. It's going to be very specifically focused on, it's going to be big, and it'll be focused on key areas in Western Myanmar.
Of resistance.
Chin State, key focuses of resistance. So that's one thing. The other point which you mentioned, I think was...
Undermanning of units.
No, there was something which you said which actually was not what I wrote, but never mind.
Okay. We can slug it out later.
Yeah, we'll slug it out later over a drink. But no, in terms
Soft drink.
In terms of... Is there a contradiction between Tatmadaw offensive power and weakness? What are their vulnerabilities? And when it comes to offensive power, when it comes to launching an operation over a course of a week, there is no question that they have units, particularly light infantry divisions, which are entirely up to the job. They're trained, they're very ruthless, they're well organized, they're cohesive, they can do this stuff, and they'll leave a lot of dead bodies in their wake. So that's one thing. The Tatmadaw problem when it comes to manpower is when you look at the size of these areas on the map, and we're not talking nationwide, we're talking a couple of regions in the west, we're talking Chin State, we're talking northeastern Sagaing, areas that have become very problematic. When you look at these areas on the map, that's a lot of geography. So what does that mean? That means you're going to be pulling out your assault troops, your well-trained, experienced LIDs, and you're going to be putting in guys from regional commands who are essentially not as motivated, not as well trained, and arguably are not going to be enjoying the job, because their job will be to sit around getting shot at. And I think at that level, if this lasts 2 months, there's no problem for the Tatmadaw, but it won't. This is going to go on certainly through to the end of the dry season, which is another 6 months, and then into the next wet season. So how long can the Tatmadaw maintain this? So in terms of the morale of guys on the ground who are having to live in or near villages where the people hate them, they're getting shot at, and there's no end in sight. And that's a real problem. And I have no crystal ball. I don't know how it's going to end up.
Right.
But clearly there are vulnerabilities on both sides.
Right. Thank you. Okay. I think Captain New Tutor might be seeing more defectors in coming months. Anyway, we will segue from that over to Nang Tuong, Permanent Secretary of the National Unity Government's Ministry of Defence, who I believe does look a lot at this question of People's Defence Forces and the relationship to the NUG. So over to you, Nang Tuong. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good evening, our fellow journalists, regional correspondents, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure and to virtually meet our fellows who are interested in current Myanmar political situation. And this is my very first time speaking at a public event, and since the 1st of February. First of all, I would like to make a record to remind me if you can hear clearly because it's raining heavily here. For those who do not know who I am, I was a lawmaker representing the 20 townships in Mandalay region from 2016 to 2020. People voted for me for the second time in the general election of 2020, the same constituency. While waiting to attend the parliament, I prepared a proposal for COVID-19 recovery plans and other reforms in public service delivery. And I stay at Municipal Avenue with the other lawmakers. I have no chance to avoid the experience of being detained by the military for a couple of nights, while they unlawfully and unconstitutionally seize the power of the people on February 1. Main online state of emergency is unconstitutional, and it is an attempt to expand his individual personal power only. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noted that all the charges against our presidents, who were me, and State Councillor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and other political leaders are not related to the electoral law? Is there well electoral fraud? They should construct a case under electoral law. Certainly, starting with the first public protest in Mandalay on February 4, all people reacted to the military with peaceful protest. At the same time, we constituted the committee representing the Pirazundato CRPH. This is our first attempt to firmly hold the legitimacy granted by the people. We saw the Myanmar military atrocities, such as cracking down the peaceful protests with left ammo. We believe the war had witnessed those atrocities in Mandalay, Lantaya, Bagot, states and places throughout the country since February 20. When people experienced the massacre throughout the country, they requested the UN R2P online and offline. It was heartbreaking to see people with the banners in front of the embassy and UN office. How many dead bodies that UN needed to take action? These are ordinary people. They may not know the technical terms and exact definition of R2P. But, ladies and gentlemen, they know that they have the right to be protected by the states and the international community. And reforming the National Unity Government and UG, we seriously consider the people wants that came from the bottom of the heart. As a legitimate government of the people, we fought the People Defense Force PDS because as a government and as a state, we had the responsibility to protect our people. Since day one of founding PDF, we have received millions of support from our people. Beside PDFs founded by NUG, in some part of the country, people founded their set out defense force in the name of PDF. We see this as a sign of how people desperately land to protect their own people, their own property, and their land from the violent act of the brutal Myanmar military. Some of you might know that there are over 300 local defense groups, and NUG Ministry of Defense is trying to gather those forces under our command. Most of those forces are willing to be under our command and to follow our rules of engagement and code of conduct. Outsiders may be worried about the outbreak of violence when people choose and I know many are questioning when NUG declares the people defense is war. We launch the defense is war for our inalienable rights, and we are fighting for our freedom. Do we hear the people demanding freedom from fear? How could our force commit violence against our own people? One of the founding principles of our people defense forces is very simple but profound. It is R2P. Therefore, we respect the basic military rule like the Geneva Conventions and follow the code of conduct. We give them not only combat training but also training for the ethics. We have no doubt about their morality over code of conduct. NUG's MOD and other ministries such as the Ministry of Human Rights, Ministry of Health and Education always show our moral stance by releasing statements and publish announcements to raise awareness about the importance of following the code of conduct. Let me tell you a true story. In the early mornings, or about a month ago, I got a call from the leaders of the forts in the central region. Here's part 1 West. I'm sorry. We called out our mission last night. Have you ever imagined the first call you will receive in the early morning West? Calling out an operation? I was angry, seriously angry at the time. But when what he said later touched my heart. The mission was to help the military compliance with expulsion after sunset. Everything was set in order. However, my fellow comrades could not turn this switch on because there was a mentally ill person just a few meters away from the compliance, and that person might have been injured or killed in the explosion that had occurred. What my comrades exactly said was, you can't blame me for failing the mission, and we cannot let an innocent civilian sacrifice, even though he is mentally ill. Although we take at the end, we still have humanity. There's many other events similar to that one. When we catch other soldiers or FCC, we always treat them with humanity. We never torture them, although they were a prisoner of war. Even though we fathers committed the crime or killed our innocent civilian, we had never done an eye for an eye. We discussed with ICRC how to manage those prisoners of war. I don't deny this. There might be incidents that administrators are attached by the end group in the name of BDS. Mostly, those administrators are not just administrators. They are installed by the military for the intelligence purpose. They spy. They assist in the military operation. Sometimes they even take aim and attack the civilians. In most of the cases, PDFs want facts, but they even challenge and continues abusing innocent civilians. PDF has no choice. There might be incidents attacked by the enemy under the name of PDFs, but our policy is whoever attacked the civilians, they made responsible for their action. It's been only a few months since PDF was officially established. We admitted that we need to do more to protect our people and train our forces. However, we try to transform our force into a standard army with all our capacity. Moreover, there's many kids SCC attempts to discuss and defend us as a part of their psychological warfare. But as we all know, this is not the first time they try to defend the revolutionary forces They did that to the Afghan army for decades. They did that to the peaceful protester. Associate defiance many times. And there's many people, especially the outsider, may get it wrong. However, we thank the international community who know the truth and stand by our side. To date, our military strategy is effective. Politically, we had public support. Internationally, SCC is abundant, and regionally, thanks to the ASEAN for making a decision not to allow the SCC to attack the summit. Onwards, I would like to recommend the chairmen and members of ASEAN carefully choose the non-political representative. This person should represent the authentic right of the people, not a small group or elite or business. Academic seems to be non-partisan and partisan. Make the strike. That's not every academic can represent that million of people twice. Look to the one who is close to the people, who understand what people need and when, so that you can set the next step. To get quality information, please make the right choice. I would like to strongly argue that the current political situations will not lead to systemic situation. It's not only as who know that Tatmadaw is facing structural deterioration. The international breed on Myanmar also state the same. See, the level of defection is unusual in the history of Myanmar military. No new recruitment anymore at this moment, not only structurally, but also morally. Tatmadaw or Myanmar military is collapsing. While PDA is fighting for the rights and the future, SCC soldiers have to fight for the interest and power forward of a small group of people. While people treat PDF as their heroes, SCC is losing public trust and support. We keep applying all foreign pressure. Our ultimate goals are to bring transitional justice for our peoples, to formulate the federal state with our fellow ethnic group. For the emphasis, we desire to do security sector reforms. What I can assure you is we are now experiencing an unprecedented level of relations and unity with our brother and sister for the nation.
Okay.
Particularly, we now have the federal charter. It is consensus-based charters developed and agreed by CRPH, ethnic leaders, ethnic party, general strike leaders, and activists. Militarily, together with our ethnic alliance, we have Central Command and Coordinating Committee, C3C, to coordinate our defense strategy.
Right,
Less,
so
but not
Nang Tuong,
least.
could we maybe, there's questions coming in and we've got one more speaker, so we can return to some of these issues, if
Yes,
that's okay. I would actually, there's some interest in asking you also, we've heard some numbers and estimates of PDFs in Myanmar, ranging from 50 serious ones to maybe 300 or more. What actually is you're overseeing some of the PDFs connected to or related to NUG. What is your impression of the numbers and the proportion of PDFs that NUG is either dealing with or supporting? Could you talk about that?
Yes. Amounts of PDFs, maybe like around 300 PDFs. Almost half, more than half of the PDFs were have connection with NUG, and they agreed to obey the code of conduct and to be under the same commands. We are trying to contact with all of the PDF, local PDF that we call, because these are based on their local levels, and they found the PDFs mostly on their what can I say, that based on the township or like like district level level. Like we are trying to connect with almost all of the local PDFs. We figure out that like send PDF doesn't exist at all. They are just on the like Facebook and
Right.
actually not exist at all.
And
But,
are you able to offer them support? Are you offering
yes,
them support? You are?
Yes, we are supporting almost half. Yeah.
Like material support, money or other forms of support?
Yeah, we support if they agreed to obey the code of conduct and the rules of engagements and like they'll shoot international humanitarian laws or something like that. We start to support. If not, we don't support.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you mind, we'll move on to our last speaker, Jason Tao, so then we can then move on to questions and maybe come back to you and the other speakers. We still have Tia Tun, who's sitting there in the forest somewhere in Myanmar. So, Jason, over to you. There's many issues raised, and I think Tony mentioned some of the areas you're going to touch on. So over to you. You've particularly been looking at also China's involvement. We haven't really talked about much about the external players, but anyway, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Gwen, and thanks especially to the FCCT for the opportunity to be here on such a fantastic panel this evening. I will touch on a few points around the different forms of violence that we're now seeing in country, particularly honing in a little bit on the ethnic armed organizations and their response to the People's Defense War, as well as a little bit on the international response that we're seeing as well, particularly with the neighboring countries and how some of their actions and responses are influencing the trajectory of the conflict as well. Let me begin with talking a little bit about how the ethnic armed organizations, in my observation, are responding to the growing presence of defense forces and people's defense forces in country. I think since the coup, you've seen the ethnic armed organizations largely see both opportunities as well as growing challenges due to the instability and violence that has ensued in country. When it comes to opportunities for some of the powerful EAOs, the coup and the real erosion of legitimate authority in Naypyidaw, I think, has opened up a space where they've been able to assert new levels of control and influence. And you've seen that particularly in Rakhine State. You've seen that to some extent in Shan State. And I think arguably you're even seeing that with Kachin and Karen states, where the KIA and KNU have also been able to take a lot of posts that they hadn't been able to take from the Tatmadaw, back from the Tatmadaw in quite a few years. So in that sense, it's brought opportunities, but also I think increasingly we're seeing more of now the challenges that are being presented to the ethnic armed organizations as a result of the Tatmadaw's ongoing violence and oppression of people in country, which is resulting, of course, in larger flows of displacement into the territories of the EAOs. It's resulting in, of course, massive economic collapse in the country, and we haven't really touched on much in terms of the economy, but that harms the EAOs as well. I mean, they're sharing a common economy. Many of the EAOs are suffering economically as a result of this. And of course, the linkages, right, between many of the communities and constituencies of those EAOs and people in other parts of the country, which are calling for EAOs to do more to assist. So I think that those growing challenges are now moving many of the powerful EAOs in a direction of both increased opportunism as well as increased efforts to support actors to try to bring about more stability in the country. So you're seeing now, I think in Kachin State and northern Shan states, you're seeing, of course, all along the Thai border in Karenni and Karen State, you're seeing in Chin State, and you're even seeing now to some extent in Rakhine State with the Arakan Army in the neighboring areas in Irrawaddy and other places, providing higher levels of support to PDFs, providing training to PDFs and defense forces. Even in the case of the Kachin, doing joint operations. You're actually seeing that, Kachin, Chin, Kaya to some extent. So much greater levels of support are there as a result of this. You're also seeing some of the Chinese-speaking ethnic armed organizations, particularly the COPAM, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, which has been working really over the last couple of years since it lost its territory in 2009 in the Kokang areas to recover that territory. And you've seen the MMDAA really scale up a lot of its narrative support to the defense armies. It's put in Chinese social media, media apps such as Weibo, WeChat, and other places, lots of positive messaging about what the defense forces and People's Defense Forces are doing, but also has shown its publicly its willingness to be supportive of those forces as well, both in solidarity as well as in providing real support in the form of training. I think also very significantly with the EAO response is that over the past month, you've even started to see the United Wa State Army, its leadership in public speeches start to raise concerns about how the chaos and actions of the Tatmadaw are increasingly causing devastation and chaos for all of the country, and alluding to the need for the Wa to potentially need to respond to that should the Tatmadaw continue to follow that particular path. So I think that shows you that you're seeing growing levels of support and to some extent some also coordination amongst the EAOs to provide assistance to some of the defense forces. Also notably, I think there's now a video circulating on many different social media platforms about the Rakhine State PDF, which gives you, I think, a very vivid picture of what the experience of those defense forces receiving training in the Rakhine territories looks like. I mean, it's meant, I think, really to be kind of a motivational type of video. Which I think opens up also implications that some of the support comes in the form of maybe even trying to voice solidarity such that recruitment can be increased on the part of some of the defense forces and People's Defense Forces. The EAO support, of course, is coming in the form of not only training, but weapons, tactical support, narrative support, as I've mentioned. And you really see it coming from every direction, kind of all parts of the periphery of the country. The other significant point on this is I think that looking forward, particularly with some of the points that Tony raised in his article, as well as in his comments, that the support to the defense forces will be strategic, both in keeping the kind of front line of the war away from the core territory of some of the ethnic armed organizations, but also will help in terms of hopefully giving higher levels of influence and control of those EAOs over some of the defense forces and People's Defense Forces. And I think that the joint operations that we're seeing in some cases offer some support for that. A second point that I wanted to touch on is a little bit around both the local and regional security challenges that we're now seeing as the full-scale civil war continues to expand. I think locally, it's important to recognize that in communities, not only are they experiencing the high levels of violence from Tatmadaw oppression, the talk about clearance operations, and these sorts of things, but also you're seeing, I think, increasingly insecurity in communities due to a complete lack of rule of law and of authorities that can respond to very simple things like burglaries or thefts or other sorts of just general day-to-day problems in communities. And that this is leading to growing levels of trauma in individual communities. But also leading to, I think, greater pressures on some of the AOs as more people are fleeing from parts of the center of the country into areas that they find safe. The same security issues, I think, are no longer able to be contained within Myanmar's borders. You're seeing also the same sorts of insecurity and problems happening also in the EAO areas where they've been subjected to increasing airstrikes, attacks by the Tatmadaw, but also populations displaced into neighboring countries where they have insecurity there as well. No clear status for these individuals, not certain whether or not they'll get protection in different areas. And I think flipping the equation around, this is also resulting in higher levels of security challenges also for communities in the border area on the Thailand side of the border, the India side of the border, and even most recently on the China side of the border, where this week we've actually seen Chinese local government authorities in the China-Myanmar border area start to issue warning notices to residents living on the China side of the border, these being Chinese nationals, that they're at increased risk of fire coming across the border, telling them that they're likely to experience more frequent incidences of large explosions or fire in areas just adjacent to them in the border area. So I think increasingly these are security challenges that are spilling over, and they're affecting the security of people in communities in the neighboring countries as well, which I think is something that really those neighboring countries need to start focusing in a lot more on in terms of thinking through how they can deal with root causes of this. The third point that I wanted to touch on deals with what I see as being probably one of the focal points of the violence that we're going to see increasingly over the coming couple of months, both as the Tatmadaw scale up the operation that Tony had referred to, but also as different armed organizations vie for control over very lucrative corridors, both strategic corridors and trade corridors. And I wanted to highlight a couple of these just briefly here. First of all, I think you're going to see that in the China-Myanmar borderlands, that there will be a significant escalation of conflict, particularly in the space where the Tatmadaw is trying to assert some control over the border and border trade in order to be able to effectively move forward with that trade with China, as well as to be able to move forward with ongoing plans that have been discussed for the construction of infrastructure in the border area. Now, the EAOs, I think, largely speaking, are quite opposed to growing Tatmadaw influence there, or Tatmadaw efforts to reassert influence there. And particularly in Kokang, this is going to be an ongoing flashpoint as the MMDAA, the Kokang ethnic armed organization that's been seeking to recover territory that runs right through the heart of that corridor from the Border Guard Force, which is a splinter of the Kokang that decided to align with the Tatmadaw back in 2009. You're seeing greater and greater levels of conflict there, both as the Tatmadaw mobilize more troops to the China border and as the MMDAA scale up recruitment, build deeper partnerships with other EAOs and defense forces, and ultimately continue their efforts from the small base that they have not far from Musée to fight back into the Kokang territories. So I think you're going to see ongoing fighting over influence over who will be able to control that strategic trade corridor, which is clearly something that China wants to push forward with. And I think arguably also some of China's efforts to push that trade and to push some of that infrastructure have played into those conflict dynamics, causing a bit of an escalation in the border. I think another area where you're going to see similar things is the space between Kachin and Rakhine states, where also as the Arakan army starts to build more and more influence in Rakhine State, as PDFs in the three states in between, in Chin and Sagaing, and in Magway in particular, have been quite successful, relatively speaking. They've been able to mount more sustained resistance in those areas. You're likely to see more support from those EAOs surrounding them in those areas, but also much more of a contest in those areas for control. And I think, again, looking at corridors and looking at what's going on about who's able to control those strategic corridors is going to be a real flashpoint of a lot of the violence. Finally, I'd like to touch a little bit on the international context, but really looking more at the immediate neighboring countries who I think have by far the greatest amount of influence over the actual parties to conflict, and that influence will also play a role in shaping both outcomes, but also shaping the trajectory of a lot of the violence. And on this, I'll touch a little bit on China, which I think represents where I think you've seen some interesting shifts really since the coup, but with a couple of dynamics in particular to touch on. First is that China is increasingly, I think, looking to EAOs in the northern part of the country, in Shan and Kachin states, to provide stability in that part of, that very key, important part along China's border. So you've seen China just more or less provide health aid to those EAOs, such as the KIA, the United Law State Army, to now the aid is also getting down a little bit further south to the Shan State Army North. But largely China has provided assistance in ways that would stabilize both the health situation, while also really, I think, looking the other way, or even encouraging in some senses some of the EAOs to build more influence with the defense forces. And here I think China both has an interest in leaning on EAOs to ensure stability for its border as well as for its strategic investments as well, but also looking to the EAOs to build some level of influence over all of the different defense forces across the country, such that those defense forces really don't start to I guess, devolve out of control into something that really becomes highly unwieldy or leads to general anarchy everywhere. So I think that the EAOs have some degree of support. At least China's not preventing them from getting involved in giving support to some of the defense forces. On the other side of the equation, though, China has really gone out of its way to try to shield the Tatmadaw from different levels of international pressure. And you've seen since the coup, its ongoing policy, both at one point it was fully telling the United Nations Security Council to effectively avoid getting involved or interfering in Myanmar. So you've seen some pretty strong efforts, both when it comes to the UN and when it comes to ASEAN as well, to try to moderate the response, or to, in the words of Wang Yi when he spoke with Brunei's foreign minister on the 14th, to really encourage ASEAN to take more of a gradual approach that follows more or less the ASEAN way. So in this sense, you've seen China offer support to the Tatmadaw and protection to the Tatmadaw, but you've also seen it very keen to move ahead with its investments and with its China-Myanmar economic corridor projects, where consistently since early August, you've seen local governments down in Yunnan resume negotiations for a lot of the strategic corridor that connects southern China down to Rakhine State, as well as also seeing some of the large Chinese state-owned enterprises start to signal their intentions to move forward with either construction or with their investments that have already been agreed with largely the former NLD government, or the displaced NLD government, I should say. But you've seen them increasingly try to push on those economic projects, which I think has played something of a role also in really causing more instability in terms of both a popular reaction to some of China's own investments, but also, I think pushing the Tatmadaw also to crack down even harder on some of the different resistance that has emerged around some of the Chinese projects. So in response to this, you've then seen, I think most recently, China start to voice some interest, at least to signal a little bit that it has the desire to maintain friendship not only with the SAC or the junta authorities, but also more broadly with the Myanmar people. So that's actually kind of what the formal policy statements have been saying increasingly from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is that China-Myanmar friendship is open to all Myanmar people. I think the difficulty with such a stance, though, is that voicing such an interest with the intention of perhaps trying to shore up the popular reputation, to shore up potentially security for some of the infrastructure projects. I think doing that, it introduces a very stark contradiction between the direction that a lot of the Chinese economic actors are taking and the expressed intention to keep some level of friendship with the broader Myanmar public. So this tension, I think, is going to continue to exist, because it's hard for, I think, at one time to be supporting both the enemy of the people and to also want to have friendship with the people as well. So I think China's overall influence on the situation is going to continue in some senses to hedge bets, particularly with the ethnic armed organizations, which it hopes will provide protection and stability to investments, as well as to ensure that the conflict doesn't pull in a lot of the Chinese investments as well. Panning out finally, with just a couple of concluding thoughts here, I think that with the recent announcements that we're seeing coming from ASEAN regarding denying the Commander-in-Chief Ming Aung Hlai from participating in ASEAN meetings, I think that this really does kind of start to open up a space where a much more robust international effort might now start to be mounted to really move in the direction of sending a strong signal that there's a very urgent need to restore stability in the region. This is clearly something that all of the neighboring countries have a vested interest in stability. It's not in India's interest or China's interest to have to issue notices to their nationals that bullets are flying across the border. And particularly with the, I think, coming operation and dramatic scaling up of conflict on the part of the Tatmadaw, this is probably a time really, I think, for the international community and particularly neighboring countries, with the support of ASEAN and the support especially of Western capitals, sustained support from Western capitals, I think, to really pan in on look at solutions that might help with prevention of much more serious types of conflict and atrocities in the coming months. So
right.
Let me conclude there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jason. That was an excellent rundown. I'm sorry, everyone. We're really running short on time. We've got a lot of questions, but I'm going to limit them very much to just a few. We do have, at great trouble, our PDF member still online in the forest or jungle inside Myanmar. There is a question here from Cha Kin, who asks a question for Captain Nyi Tuta and Mang Thi Hatun, if you're still there, and possibly NUG. And it's particularly in light of what Tony Davis mentioned about the coming dry season and the offensives taking place. So the question is, without disclosing your various strategies, is there potential, or in fact, are there any linkages or plans to increase linkages for coordinated responses from all PDF fighters, all PDF fighters and people soldiers, and also Mang Thi Hatun, I did ask about these connections anyway between PDFs, but given what Captain Nyi Tuta told us about the demoralization in the Tatmadaw, and possibly more defections, what are the indications or preparations for any kind of linkages? Would you like to answer that first, Mang Thi Hatun?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes? We can. We
Oh,
can hear
yes.
you.
I only heard the last part of
The question was about
linkages.
the question was about your linkages in PDFs with possible more linkages with with defectors from People's Soldiers, as well as more coordination and cooperation, not just with People's Soldiers but maybe with others.
I see. I think Captain Nituda might answer first before me. Then I like to follow
Well,
up.
I
with
wanted to
his
get you
answer.
while you still had an internet connection, actually.
Okay. All right. Okay then.
သူ့ကိုအရင်ဖြေခိုင်းတယ်ပြီးတော့မှ
Okay ကျွန်တော်ရဲ့ internet connection ကအချိန်မရွေးပြတ်တောက်သွားနိုင်လို့လေကျွန်တော်တော့ထဲလာသုံးရတာဆိုတော့ပြတ်လိုက်ကြလိုက်ဆိုတော့အဆင်ပြေမယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်အရင်ဖြေလိုက်မယ်လေနော်ပြီးမှပဲ
Okay.
Captain Nituda အနေနဲ့ဖြေကောင်းမယ်
Someone
ချစ်
interpret, please.
လို့ခွန်ကအကြံပေးတယ်ခင်ဗျ
ရပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ Okay. Yes, you can.
Okay, so going back to your questions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is.
So going back to your
Tiatun.
questions, one.
Yeah. Go on. Go on. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So about the defectors as the SAC soldiers, for our PDF, just for our PDF, we have around 12 defected soldiers, but most of them wants to stay out of trouble, so they don't want to take arms anymore. But that doesn't mean that they don't support the PDF. The defected soldiers who don't take arms usually ended up training our new recruits or giving us a better training. For example, most of our trainings are the basic military trainings of the basic trainings, just like how to crawl, crocodile crawls, and how to assemble arms and take positions and basic trainings, and they just got sent to battles for our PDFs. But with the defected soldiers, a few of them are
Training you.
small officers. So they teach our PDF soldiers how to handle 60 millimeters or some launchers, how to handle 81 millimeters or things like other strategies trainings for the defected soldiers who don't want to take arms anymore. But there are a few defected soldiers. They took up arms again, joined the PDFs, and fought the SAC army, the Tatmadaw again. So, but I think on the other hand, it's very difficult for the soldiers to defect or to leave the Tatmadaw.
Right.
Based on my personal conversations with 4 or 5 of them, a lot of them have no idea or whatsoever. For them, they just live in their own bubbles.
Right.
So,
Okay.
For example, one of the soldiers said he had no idea there was a coup, there was a demonstration, there was fighting. He had absolutely no idea whatsoever was going on in the country. Right. It was after, like 4 months after the military, 4 months after the coup, but he had no idea there was coup.
Right.
So on his way back, his convoy was attacked, and he was wondering, why is why are the captains acting that way, or why is the convoy acting a different way? Things like that. He had no idea.
Right.
To be fair, he was sent to the front line for a couple of years. So that would be another reason. But most of them, they want to run away. They want to go defect. Right. But chances are that they leave the weapons.
Right.
Because if they run away with his weapons, the PDF might shoot him on sight. He might have no time to explain himself.
Okay. Because he's in uniform.
Yeah. And then he would be running at night, or usually on his watch duty. So that's usually the time. After being in the army for some time, he knows that when they tend to sleep, when they tend to relax.
Right.
So he got defected.
Right.
And
Okay.
then,
Yeah.
yep.
No, go on. Just finish.
Okay, and then some of the defectors, most of the defectors were they were in the military for a short time. I'm talking about only just 3 years, 4 years, up to 5, 6 years in the military. So, and then most of them were tricked into joining the Tatmadaw. So there was some sort of human trafficking. They were tricked, they were used, they were lied, and then they got into Tatmadaw. So they got no choice but to be in Tatmadaw, and if they run, they would die.
Right. Okay.
But only in this kind of situations that they are willing to take the risk.
Right.
Uh,
As in
Others
desperate.
other defectors were not really defectors. They were somehow subjugated to go defect because we surrounded their station, or they had no choice.
Right.
But people who voluntarily, like defectors who voluntarily ran away on their watch duty or during battles or whatsoever, usually they were like kind of fresh
Right.
recruits, fresh being like 5, 6 years being in
Okay.
the Tatmadaw.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Let's hear from Captain Nyi Tuta. What do you think about the prospects of more cooperation with PDFs and your view on what Mang Thiha Tun said? Hello, Captain Nyi Tuta? Or are
Firstly,
you using
it is-
interpreter?
Hello, can you hear?
Yes?
Yes, I will answer myself. Okay.
Okay.
Firstly, it is important for you to know there are many soldiers don't know about
Sorry, we're losing the
what is
connection with
happening
you.
in the
Sorry,
country.
go on.
This
Say
is
again.
because-
Say that again, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, firstly, it is important for you to know that many soldiers don't speak Tamil. They don't know about what is happening in the country because lack of information. That is because the general has imposed an information blackout upon them. So we need to make them realize the truth of the situation. The main thing to make sure that the soldiers don't spoil the Tamil. The way the four line work began wasn't our Tamil way callers. The military had their force aims. So we had to use guerrilla testing to produce ammunition. Once the military became exhausted, many soldiers won't support the military. In addition, we need to change our strategy to defeat the whole military instead of just focusing on changing the leadership.
Right. But what is their view of cooperating with PDFs? Oh, I think we've lost him.
Yes, yes, it is difficult to cooperate with PDF in short term, because we need to build a strong relationship. So some of the soldiers are training PDS are in some areas, and most of the soldiers include me, advise about
PDS.
About PDS. Yeah.
So how many of you are advising PDFs or training them, do you think?
Yes. Yeah. So we are advisors or many PDS group, or especially our local PDS. We have the military advisory group.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we really have run out of time. I'm going to let Jeffrey, who is standing at the microphone, ask the last question. We have many good questions that are on our Facebook page, and I am really sorry we couldn't get to those. I hope, though, people who are watching and people who are viewing on Facebook will look at those questions, and maybe some of you speakers might even want to answer some of those questions by getting onto that Facebook. But anyway, over to you, Jeffrey. Perhaps introduce yourself.
Jeffrey Goddard, club member, journalist in Myanmar for about 15 years.
Can you speak up a bit, please? So yeah.
Jeffrey Goddard, club member, journalist in Myanmar for about 15 years. Excuse me. I have a question for Jason Tower. How concerned does he think how much concern does he think that China has about the oil and gas pipelines? Does he think that EAOs are using the oil and gas pipelines as leverage to get more support from China?
Good question, thank you. And I'm sure maybe one or two other panellists might want to comment on that, and that's going to be your last shot. So, Jason, you heard that?
Yeah, I would say that has to be one of China's top strategic priorities in country, given that that pipeline accounts for 5% of its oil imports, supplies oil to the largest single economic project in all of Yunnan province. That's roughly 10% of the GDP of the province, plus providing in the range of 78% of its natural gas imports. So this is incredibly important strategically.
Could you speak up a bit, Jason? Just speak a bit louder.
Oh, can you hear me okay, Glenn?
That's a bit better, thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going to say just that China has looked for assurances from the EAOs that they would both provide protection and security to China's strategic investments in country. And, I think it's also significant that China and Chinese investors have partnerships also with some of the larger of the EAOs. But that one probably calculation at the moment is that the pipeline itself is increasingly threatened. The security of the pipeline is increasingly threatened as a result of everything that's happening in country, because we've already seen several attacks by PDFs on either the loading station of the pipeline or of some of the surrounding structures. So you have seen those things. Those have been things where China's responded by, generally having urgent and immediate conversations with the junta about it, looking for assurances to bring in additional personnel or to have further security deployments in the pipeline. So I think it is something that certainly PDFs are recognizing, or defense forces have recognized, and it's proven to be a flashpoint already in that relationship. And I think as things move forward, there is a likelihood that could happen, although I would say that when it comes to most of the northern EAOs in the China border area, that's probably a red line for them. They would look to try to do what they could to provide security to Chinese investments, because they need China for access to a lot of important and strategic resources.
Right. Tony, you have something
Jason,
to say?
could I just follow up on what you said with a sort of a follow-up question? And it's this. What strikes me is when you look at the PDF and PDF activity in central Myanmar, particularly I referred in my own presentation to attacks on infrastructure, right? Mytel mobile phone towers getting blown up in literally 130, 140, 150 different attacks. Also attacks on railways. I'm struck by the fact that the pipelines have hardly been touched. There might have been maybe one or two minor incidents involving pumping stations or associated facilities. But as a target, what strikes me is they're not on the list. And my question would be, if you agree with that, and you may not, but if that is the case, does this reflect greater Tatmadaw security efforts or some sort of a deal with the NUG as the only coordinating body that leave our pipelines off the table and we can all get on?
And could I also extend that question to Nang Tuong, if you're listening, is there a deal to protect some of China's interests? Or even indeed, Mang Thi Hatun, if there's any thinking about China's interests, investments. Anyway, yes, Jason. That was Tony's question.
Did you want to extend the question first? I'm happy for others to take that first.
I just wanted to follow up with you specifically, given we have a slightly different perspective on this. And
okay,
yeah.
Keep it short.
Yeah.
We're just
so
about.
My short answer is that I think that it's a combination of both China requesting stronger security along the pipeline from the Tatmadaw, which is something that has happened at multiple occasions since the coup, plus also China reaching out to and requesting assurances from some of the EAOs to assist in offering that protection. So again, I think one thing that I'm also looking at is how EAOs that are involved in providing training or support to some of the defense forces kind of that are operating along those corridors, they're certainly going to be encouraging those defense forces and trying to offer assurances to those defense forces not to go after that infrastructure. So that's where I see those dynamics playing out. It's really that China's reached out to all of these parties, and again, our colleague from the NUG can probably speak more to the NUG's experience, but I do know that China's also reached out there to ask for some security assurances as well.
Right. Okay. So finally, Nang Tuong, if you're still there, what do you have to say to that about the notion that China has this question about whether there's some tacit agreement or feeling about protecting or not interfering unduly with China's infrastructure, pipeline in particular, of PDFs and particularly NUG-supported PDFs?
Yes, NUG's foreign policies are to build a relation with every countries. NUG were not orders to PDFs anything that would hand that would deteriorate the relation with other countries.
Okay. All right, thank you. And finally, Mang Thi Hatun, is there any thinking in your PDF about China infrastructure or indeed, you still there? Yeah.
Yes, for our PDF, we don't see that big of a big picture. For us, our struggles are on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Maybe what we do next, what kind of attack we should lead. So we don't have the luxury, or we can't afford to have that kind of big picture, or we are struggling to make ends meet. But if I should say my opinion, and I believe I would express a lot of my colleagues or my fellow.
Your fellow Are you still there? Are you with us? No, I think we've lost him. Are you back? Okay. I think, actually, as I said, there were so many good questions. Can I recommend people also who are here? If you, are you back?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We
Yes.
lost you when you said fellow something.
Oh yeah, I believe I also express my fellow rebels' opinions in terms of China's intervention or relation or whatsoever with our struggles. Though our PDF is not near the pipeline, but personally, we would like to form it up if things played out in our hands, because we are also getting impatient with this whole coup thing and with the battles, and with our fallen soldiers, that we are kind of desperate to move things faster. So maybe it would turn out the wrong way. It might irritate China, and it may not produce the result we want.
Right.
Our result being China not supporting the SAC soldiers or the SAC government. But personally, if only given a chance, we wouldn't hesitate at all to bomb the pipeline.
Okay. All right. Tell it like it is. Thank you very much. Okay. On that happy note, I'd really just like to thank you all, particularly some of you who took a risk, and thank you Captain Yituta and interpreter who was on hand to help, and particularly Mang Thi Hatun, Tintin Yo, and Nang Tu Ong, also of course Jason and Tony. I'd also like to thank our technical maestro up there, Kun Tum, who has handled this very tricky live stream with people coming and going. And I'd just like to say, do look at some of the comments on the Facebook page and the questions, and I am very sorry we couldn't get to the questions. The comments and remarks took longer than we thought they would, but I think you'd agree that that was a pretty good, comprehensive debate, and I think we all learnt a lot. So thank you very much all, and please keep your eye out for the next in the Myanmar series. We hope to do another one in a few weeks' time, and look at the program for next week, and please support the Foreign Correspondents Club and the Myanmar Media Fund that we're also running. So thank you very much, and good night.
Your guy at Chin State was damn good.
What?
The guy at Chin State was really good.
He's fucking good.